We'll turn our attention tonight to a developing crisis that is hitting every Nigerian where it hurts the most, their pockets. In just 1 week, the price of petrol has skyrocketed from 860 to 930 naira per litre, at least here in Lagos, with reports of some stations inside Lagos now selling even above that. What's the reason? They call it a looming deadline, which expires today, March 31st, on the controversial Naira-For-Crude deal between the federal government and NPC Limited and the Dangote Petroleum Refinery. This 6-month arrangement, which began in October last year, allowed Dangote Refinery to purchase Nigerian crude in Naira instead of dollars. It's a move meant to stabilize fuel supply and prices. But with hours left before the deal expires, negotiations are still deadlocked, and the committee set up to decide its fate has failed to reach an agreement. The uncertainty has sent shock waves through the market, leaving fuel dealers panicked and consumers stranded. So what exactly is happening behind closed doors? Is this deal being extended, or are we staring at another full-blown fuel crisis? And why does Nigeria's energy security seem to hinge on a single refinery's contract? Big questions we're asking tonight. And I'm joined by someone who knows, who's quite active in the oil and gas industry. He's former Chief Technical Advisor to Imo State Governor and Public Affairs Analyst, Jerry Chikwueke. Thank you for coming at such short notice.
Thank you
for coming.
Happy Salah holidays to Nigerians, and happy birthday to Mr. President.
To Mr. President.
All right.
That's true. Happy birthday, Mr. President. All right. The deal hasn't expired yet, and already we felt it in the market. The last time I bought fuel was 930 naira in Lagos. What do you think makes it happen so fast? We're going to get to the contract and why it should be discontinued, or why it should continue. But why do you think marketers anticipate these things and then Nigerians feel it so fast?
Well, you know, by the way, I don't want to preempt the negotiations going on, but we can break this down in simple language. A few months ago, our production was close to 1.7 million barrels of crude a day. Now, let's understand what that means. Half of it belongs to the international oil companies, IOCs, and they don't sell their crude. They take their crude to their refineries abroad. So half of it is ours. But look what's going on. You saw the numbers that were being bandied around last week, that forward sales had now, tabulated to over $15 billion. What does that really mean? We borrowed money over the years and pledged crude, certain numbers of barrels of crude per day as repayment. So you got to bring that into the equation. In addition to that, this government is battling to continue to earn dollars. Bear in mind that the budget numbers is like $75 per barrel. Today, our crude is down between 71 and 73. So we're underperforming. So if you take the forward sales out, then you take what must be sold to earn dollars to continue to keep the economy reasonably stable. That net is what we're talking about for the refineries in Nigeria. So if you had a 6-month deal as we did, why Dangote? Because of capacity. It's a reference point. He has a capacity of 650, and I think he's currently producing at about 400, depending on the availability of crude. So you now have to divvy up what's left of the crude with him, the big player, and the smaller players. So the answer is what Mr. President has been talking about, targeting crude production to about 2.5 million barrels a day. Now, in the last month and a half, 2 months, it's not quite clear as to why it appears that our production is dipped just a bit Maybe it's an organizational thing going on. But the answer is we need a higher crude production, and we need it stable, because you have to accommodate for the loaded up sales ahead of us. You now have to also accommodate what must be sold to earn dollars, and then what's left for the refineries. So if Dangote's deal was Naira-For-Crude, and perhaps we don't have that crude to that volume to supply Dangote, he has to buy crude from elsewhere abroad, and he has to pay dollars, doesn't he? And if he has to pay dollars, it means that he needs dollars for his products.
Well, it sounds like
he's fighting to source dollars like everybody else. There are no special allocations, as far as I know, anymore for Dangote.
Yeah.
So if he's got to pay his suppliers dollars, he's looking for dollars to also be able to pay him. So his business is in alignment. If he's taking Naira in and has to buy crude to make up the shortfall from abroad, and which he's been doing, by the way, now he has to do more of it. He needs more dollars.
You already answered the question of why a single refinery contract has destabilized the entire fuel market. It's a question of size, but it's also hard to tell whether NNPC is speaking enough to help us understand all the details, because you make it sound like the idea of Naira-For-Crude is not just a decision government can make at the snap of a finger. But given what we currently experience, what appears a decline in production, do you think we have enough crude to honor these export commitments you're talking about and also service domestic refining?
Well, that's the point I was making earlier. The upfront sales is a big issue. You have to honor those international agreements. Monies were borrowed against our future production. Those have to be honored. Now, I'm not necessarily suggesting that there is a significant reduction in production. But what we need on the doorstep of this president and his administration, we're dealing with a very significant amount of money that was borrowed and collateralized. In fact, it was basically loan and funding for crude. And you have to honor those agreements. This goes back years now.
But if we produce more, we'll be able to cater to that, right?
That's the point. So that is what I keep saying, that the answer to all of this is that we must all focus on what must happen for production to continue to go up. Because we are now just nearing getting to our OPEC quota, but we have external obligations. Angola doesn't have anywhere near this kind of forward sales obligation. It's very significant. If we're producing today some 1.5, 1.6 million barrels, and you split it in two between Nigeria and the international oil companies, and then you have to go divvy these numbers up to get to what's left for the local refineries. I'm sure that's what they're battling with. They probably don't have that room as much as they did in the last 6 months to renew on similar terms. So we're hoping they can work it out.
The good thing is, Mr. President has always said that I understand what the problems were before I decided to run for office, so don't pity me. But another big question is, why can't NNPC, for instance, provide clear public data on exactly how much crude has been allocated to domestic refining versus exports? Because we seem to still do not have the details in this regard.
Well, what I can say about that, perhaps, is the fact that the whole energy management and situation, it's pretty much become national security. And those numbers have to be sensitively managed. Remember, we also must continue to grow the confidence of our people, because hope is the key. So long as our people believe that it will get better, we will keep pushing forward. And what we don't want are any of these negatives. And I'm sure Mr. President is watching this very closely. And I said in the last program, he's got several things that keep him up at night. The crude production is a big one.
You talked about hope.
Yes.
Which, according to this administration, is renewed. For the average Nigerian now paying 9.35 per litre, when can they expect relief? Is there any scenario where prices might decrease in the next quarter? Because when we saw it drop, the anticipation was high that perhaps it's going to drop even further.
Correct. Now, remember, in the last couple of months, inflation had cooled off a little bit. But with this new increase that is significantly exponential, that's going to impact inflation again. And so the balancing act has to come back in. I think that there are many important things going on now, that in the near future, the Shell onshore assets that have just been bought over by the Renaissance Group, many of them are producing fields. We have an important opportunity to start to ramp up again. Just like what Oando did with Ajib and Seplat with ExxonMobil. And this government is encouraging those transactions so as to enable our local companies access onshore assets that are producing. And the whole idea is to ramp up production of crude. Any other story doesn't work. It is just keep producing, keep going, get them up, get them up. And that must be the song and dance every day.
Can't we pause these, foreign obligations for a while and prioritize 100% of remaining output for domestic refining until we solve the crisis?
Well, good point, but it's easier said than done because some of these international organizations have strong African content. For example, Afri-Exim. How do you tell them you're not going to pay him? You want to bring him down? That's going to affect the whole of Africa's interests, not just in Nigeria, but around the African continent. Afri-Exim has done a fantastic job in partnering with Nigerian businesses. And remember, they raise money from hedge fund companies and so on abroad because they command the confidence. And when they get those dollars, they're looking for important opportunities in Nigeria and other African countries and governments to power the economy. So you don't want to slow them down neither. Such institutions, we must continue to meet those obligations we have because the opportunities they provide us and other African countries are immense. So it's in our strategic interest.
We have to wrap this now. You mentioned earlier that this president can be blamed for this, but who should Nigerians hold responsible for our current situation? Government for poor oversight, oil companies for underproduction, or even marketers for price speculation, because this deal is still active until the end of today, but already the prices have changed.
Oh yeah, because it's a crude allocation issue for Dangote refinery. Like I said earlier, if they have to purchase crude in dollars, they were doing that even in the 6-month contract, but they now have to do more of that. They have to pay in US dollars. So they need to be able to sell their products in dollars to be able to meet their obligations outside. Now going back to who to blame, we know what the history has been. Low productivity, instability in the Niger Delta, oil theft, and vandalization of hydrocarbon facilities and infrastructure. Those remain critical in how we manage them and keep production going, encourage local producers in terms of local oil companies, and that's happening now. Activate as many of the producing fields that are laying dormant for a while, reactivate them and get them on stream and producing. The more we can produce, the better off we'll be. And that's a key job every day. How do we get production higher?
How much pressure should this administration be under? Because Mr. President still talked about his off-the-script declaration that subsidy is gone. And it is the basis upon which this economy has been built. For many Nigerians who have to pay more for commodity in the market, they blame this administration for that. Do you think they should be under pressure to perform? Because if the price is not coming down, it impacts directly on the purchasing power of the average Nigerian.
Absolutely.
And it's on that basis that his performance will be measured.
Well, this is where I think Mr. President needs the highest level of cooperation from the subnational leaderships. Governors have to really work harder because what we, in terms of advantage, got out of removal of subsidy, these monies are being sent to the state and local governments in terms of allocations. that have gone up by over 3 times plus. So what that means is that our state governors now have the opportunity to deploy the robust funds that are coming in strategic and yet intentional ways to elevate poverty, bring more people into the safety net, and reduce the pain of our people. Because what we got out of the removal of fuel subsidy, we're gaining in allocation. The question is, how good a job are we doing with the robust allocations in terms of how that's impacting the lives of our people? I think our governors are going to work harder. They know what's going on.
It sounds good, but on a personal level, how optimistic are you?
Well, like I said,
we're entering the second quarter tomorrow.
Yes, so if you watch Mr. President, that's my read. He takes a liking to governors who are performers. You know, that's my opinion. You watch it, you see. And
ministers that he thinks are performing, even though they're controversial.
And regardless of party, Mr. President is watching and encouraging governors to perform more. That's an important opportunity. And I think the more active, focused, strategic, disciplined play subnational leaders put in play, it will help cushion our people. Right. Because the funds are coming in now.
Entrepreneur and former Chief Technical Advisor to Imo State Governor Jerry Chukwueke, thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you. Very glad to be here. Thank you.
Glad to have you.